Amazon recently published some news regarding the upcoming series The Lord of the Rings: The Rings of Power, which is planned to release 2nd of September 2022. So far, Amazon rarely released anything regarding their show and only rumors circulated through the internet. But this seems to change now. They released 23 poster images for the upcoming show, and VanityFair.com also published an article with screenshots of the series and some information revealing details about the characters. The characters we already have seen on the posters, but there we did not see their faces yet. With the article we now have a good idea who is what character and some further details of the show. And now they also released the first teaser trailer during the Super Bowl, so we have lots of information. I want to cover the posters a bit and combine it with the information from the article and interview, but also add what we learned from the trailer in this video and give you a brief summary of what we know so far and connect it to the book's lore. I started writing this video before the trailer released and then added the information from the trailer afterwards, so the structure might be a bit strange in case you wonder. It's not perfect. Also, we learned from an interview with the showrunners that Amazon only has the rights for Lord of the Rings plus appendices and The Hobbit. This detail is implemented a bit inconsistently into this video as well, and the whole series has to be understood in this context. The plan is we go through every character we might see on those posters and I mix in the trailer information. It might be helpful to have seen it before. Everything is linked in the description. There should be time codes too. Each poster showed us a character and focused on a certain aspect or object in which maybe some hints and details are hidden. I already went through every picture, the article and the trailer in long live streams, but people voted for a shorter summary and here it is, and it did not become very short. I tried to explain what it could mean from the book's lore perspective, plus some speculation and my opinion. I also want to look a bit at Tolkien's writing systems. As always, I try to pronounce names as Tolkien described it. That means a lot of trilled R's. Shoutouts to the artists who allowed me to use the amazing artworks like Kimberly 80, Ted Nasmith, Sara Morello, Jenny Dolphin, Firat Solhan and all the others. Also, spoiler warning, I will show trailer footage and reference what we know from the books. I want to start with the pictures that have something written on them, also a good point for a short excursion into elven writing systems. We start with this one. We see a potential noble person holding a scroll. On the scroll we see something written in Tengwar. The name Tengwar translates simply to letters and is Quenya. Quenya is an old elven language that Tolkien described as Elven Latin, at least from the perspective of Lord of the Rings. In Middle-earth, most elves used Sindarin to converse, which is of course also related to Quenya. Tengwar is now a writing system invented by a very important elf of the First Age, Feanor, the first son of Finwë, first king of the Noldor elves, one of the three big elven clans. Feanor was the greatest elven craftsman of all time and, for example, created, according to Gandalf, the Palantiri, the Seeing Stones. His greatest work, though, are three extremely powerful gems called the Silmarillion, that captured the light of the legendary two trees of Valinor in them. The trees were the light source of the world during the years of the trees besides the stars. This was before sun and moon were created. A big portion of the First Age is related to those gems, and the book covering it is also called the Silmarillion, which means of the Silmarils. So the name similarity is as a result not a coincidence. The elves also invented another writing system called Cirth. I think it was created by a cinder elf from Dorias called Daeron. We come to that in a later picture. Tengwar, also called Fëanorian letters, is in a way more advanced with all its fine rounded lines. Carving it into metal or stone is more difficult compared to Cirth as a result, and so using it also maybe shows a bit that your society advanced. One of the most well-known lines in Tengwar is for sure what is written on the One Ring in The Lord of the Rings. Here the language is black speech though, and Sauron used Tengwar to write it on the ring. On the scroll in the picture, we can actually read something written in modern English using Tengwar. It literally reads King's Square View from South. Was a bit difficult to read. The system focuses on consonants, and vowels are often indicated by adding diacritics called tehtar above or below a consonant, at least in some so-called modes. So 3 dots above a Tengwar letter would mean there is a vowel A. Depending on the mode you use, the vowel is placed before the consonant or after it. The reason for that is that, for example, Quenya words very often end on a vowel, while Sindarin words almost always end on a consonant. In addition, there are some special cases. In addition, Tengwar is a phonetic system too, so the letters basically show what kind of sound you have to make. Here in this script they use a full mode, where the vowels are actually written out as own letters and not diacritics. I won't go through every word in this detail, but at least I wanted to explain the system once. The letters for the first word are hard to read, but are K pronounced K, I pronounced E, the NG sound with an indicator for a nasal sound above it, that's a little wave, followed by an S, so that reads kings. Next word is unusual, and I make it a bit shorter. We see again the S followed by the letter that is K in Beleriand mode for Sindarin, I think. Next is W sound, who. In this full mode we also have a letter for the vowel E, and then this hook above is slightly unusual. Shoutouts to my moderator Kirdan, who helped me out a lot here. It's only mentioned in the Parma Eldalamberon issue 20 on page 35 and page 73 as far as we know, and it seems to indicate an English R sound at the end of a word, I think. Pretty advanced stuff. The word then reads square. The E at the end in square is silent, so it does not appear here. I should mention that vowels are always pronounced I, E, O, U, A. Next word is strange too. It starts with a V sound. I think it can also be an F sound. Then I, E and U. It's a bit strange to be honest, but maybe I and E form a diphthong, so 2 vowels form 1 syllable, but diphthongs are usually written differently. So that reads view. Next is straightforward again, F-R-O-M, though I think the lines should be connected at the bottom. It's also only an M in the Beleriand mode, I think. That would read from. The last word is again the S, the next is also unusual. In Beleriand mode it's a diphthong AU. The base letter is an A, and the line above indicates a diphthong with the U. The last letter is the TH sound, so it reads south. As a result, we can read King's Square View from South. If we look at what we see above, we see trees painted and other things, so I guess on the scroll is a drawing, and this is its description. It's a drawing of the King's Square from the south. There's also something written on the left from our perspective. It should read Eregion. We clearly see the E and the R. The letter after the R is really hard to read, but the G, G, the I, the O and the N can be seen relatively well again, so it reads Eregion. Why would a picture be important and stored in such a valuable case for a scroll? Maybe it will be built or is an important place for the plot. Maybe it's a picture of this place sent to a friend. Some speculated, me included, that this person might be Elrond, but with Eregion on it, it really might be Celebrimbor. Elrond's twin brother Elros decided to be counted towards men and became the first king of Númenor, the realm of the Dúnedain, the men of the west, on a huge island. He probably had a king's square and maybe sent a scroll to his brother to show him how it looked in Númenor. Celebrimbor, though, was not a king, but maybe he planned to build a square honoring the kings of the Noldor. These were my initial thoughts. However, from the Vanity Fair article, we can see that this character is most likely not Elrond, but the character depicted here is also not in the article nor in the trailer. Well, Elrond is. One elven character missing though is Celebrimbor, and as a result I think it's him. Another possibility would be Gil-galad, but we know from the trailer and from leaks that Gil-galad is most likely this character seen here in the trailer. We come to that in a moment, so Celebrimbor is the most likely option for this one here. The clothes of this person look very valuable. Hard to tell if Elvish, but if it's men, then the person should be from Númenor for sure. Gondor, and I guess as a result also Númenor, was inspired by ancient Egypt a bit, according to letter 211. Not sure if the series goes with this too, but that would maybe speak for this being an elf instead. Inside the sleeves we see again something like a sun with an eye in it, or that is a Silmaril glowing. Maybe it's a flower, and we know there is Glorfindel, Lord of the House of the Golden Flower. In the mentioned unofficial information, this is as mentioned Celebrimbor. If these patterns in the sleeves are Silmarilli, then this could make sense too. Celebrimbor is, in some versions, Tolkien wrote, the grandson of the mentioned Feanor, and in Lord of the Rings at least mentioned to be related, so that version is, in my opinion, pretty canon. With Eregion written on the scroll, this also makes perfect sense to be Celebrimbor, who was a founder of that realm and the ringsmith who made the Rings of Power with his guild. Next picture. Here we see a warrior in armor with a sword. On the sword pommel we see a sun symbol. It gives me an overall Númenorian impression. On the blade we see the sun symbol too, and also a bit of rust I think, so it has seen use or got in contact with a few droplets of water. The Númenorians lived on an island and were mariners, so that makes sense. In an interview published on VanityFair.com with the showrunners Patrick McKay and J.D. Payne, they state that this sword is Narsil, which means red and white flame in Quenya. I did not see that coming, but the name Narsil references sun and moon. Anar means sun and Isil means moon. Interestingly, the sons of Elendil also share this reference in their names, Anarion and Isildur. However, this could imply that on the other side of the sword we might see a moon. It should be mentioned though that Narsil is a dwarven sword in origin, crafted by the dwarf Telchar, and I assume it landed somehow in King Thingol's armory. He was the first Sindar king in the First Age. How it may have gotten to Númenor from there is not clear, but see my Elrond and the Second Age video, which covers almost everything happening in the Second Age in detail and looks into this question as well. A detail from the books that might contradict it being called Narsil at this point during the events in Númenor is a line from the Silmarillion about the wars of the Last Alliance at the very end of the Second Age. And the sword of Elendil filled orcs and men with fear, for it shone with the light of the sun and of the moon, and it was named Narsil. This could be understood as Narsil being named in that war, which happened much later, and it's also the first mention of the name Narsil in the Silmarillion. It's not even clear if it ever was in Númenor, but I guess you can interpret it differently too. So, with these details and the information from the interview, this person is supposed to be Elendil, father of Isildur. We don't see Elendil in the Vanity Fair article nor in the trailer, but we see this exact symbol on the bridge at the beginning of the trailer. So this person comes most likely from this place here, which I'm pretty sure is a port city in Númenor. The mountain in the background would be Meneltarma, and considering the shadows of the people and assuming the daytime to be early noon, it might be west of this place, which would indicate that this is the harbor city Romenna. For it to be Andunir or Eldalonde, one of the other harbor cities, the sun would need to be in the north, which for example can happen on the southern hemisphere in our world, though Númenor is still most likely in the northern hemisphere, and Tolkien's world is still flat at this point, with the sun moving from the gates of morning to the door of night along the equator. A further hint might be this small island with the lighthouse on it, which could be Tol Uinen in the Bay of Romena, with the tower Calmindon on it, which means light tower, placed by Tar Aldarion. This is an impressively small detail from the unfinished tales if true. The statue in the background might be then Elrond's twin brother Elros, first king of Númenor. It could also be the Maya Eonwe, who taught them and gave them wisdom and power and a longer lifespan. Eonwe is the herald of Manwë, the king of the Valar, the High Angels. So I'm pretty sure it's Númenor. The ships also don't really look like elven ships. It seems the series will use the sun symbol for Númenor, but it's strange that it's on the dwarven sword Narsil. The symbol on the armor looks a bit different, especially if this is Romena. Elendil lived in Andúnir, and the lords of Andúnir were later not that popular among those loyal to the king's line. But back to the poster. In the stream we speculated it is maybe Isildur or his brother Anarion, because Anar means sun. Anarion would mean son of the sun. That would be fitting. I read in chat that the sun is a Númenorian symbol, but I could find no good source for that in the books. I could only find that some of the later banners were black and golden. Stars most likely also played an important role, because to reach Númenor, the early men, the Edain, who fought against Morgoth in the War of Wrath and got the island as a reward, had to follow a star. That is also why the island was called Elena, which means starwards. So I would also expect a star to play a role in the Númenorian banner. Of course, the sun is a star too, but a very specific one for us and usually depicted differently to other stars. If somebody knows more, let me know in the comments. If we zoom in on the ring, we can see that something is written on it and it looks like Tengwar. I tried for hours to decipher it, but I could not make much sense out of it. Some letters are hard to recognize, one letter makes almost no sense, and the diacritics are also hard to see. For example, this letter here contains an N and has a circumflex above. I assume the circumflex represents 3 dots for following A in Quenya mode, but there is another letter before the N. I assume it's an R. If you put R and N really close together, it looks like this, which seems pretty similar, but I could be completely wrong here. The letter before is also hard to read. Maybe an L? My best guess is something like Lorna or Lerna. We can't see the letter before it, and the rest is actually easier to read but also cut off. I read Entu or Untu. I assume it's actual Quenya this time, not English, because the mode that makes most sense for this is the Quenya mode. Entul would mean to come again in Quenya. We find the phrase Aure Entuluva in the Silmarillion, meaning they shall come again. Untup could mean to cover down. Lorna might be related to Lorie, which means sleep or even dream. We find it in the name Lorien, but I could be completely wrong here again. It's really hard to read. Only the na can be read easily, but something, as said, seems to be attached to the front of the n. My moderator suggested it could also mean hloima untupa, which would mean something like cover up poison, but it's not fitting to 100% either. If this person is Elendil, one would expect the Ring of Barahir, but we don't see the 2 serpents with emerald eyes as described in the Silmarillion. Quote, "For this ring was like 2 twin serpents whose eyes were emeralds, and their heads met beneath a crown of golden flowers, that one upheld and the other devoured. That was the badge of Finarfin and his house." Also, Elendil was very tall, even for a Númenorian, and called Elendil the Tall as a result. We find notes of Tolkien in the unfinished tales that he was over 2 meters 40, 7 foot 11 inches. As a result, the sword he is holding on the image, in case it's him, must be really long as well, considering they use this height in the series, and the tip of the sword touches the ground on the same height as his feet. Next image, we see a person in golden robes. I speculated a lot about who this person might be. The last king of Númenor was also called Ar-Pharazôn the Golden in some texts. So this seems to be a good match, but we also see 2 stars with 8 rays. Some speculate those are Fëanorian stars, but of course stars play a big role in many cultures. The Fëanorian stars are mentioned in The Lord of the Rings with the depiction of the doors of Durin, Moria's west gate. There the rays all have the same length though. We also see several rings. Overall I got a feel of somebody very wealthy, and also in context of Tolkien's universe, gold has a tendency or trend for evil, as we can read in Morgoth's ring, while silver does not, which is maybe why elves often have names including the word silver. The light of stars and moon is also often described as such. Of course, it's not like elves avoided gold completely, but golden robes are nothing I would imagine an elf would wear to this extent. So I even thought this person might be Sauron in his disguise of Anatar, which means Lord of Gifts. I guess to make many physical gifts, one has to possess a lot, and this person looks like it. In combination with this evil tendency, I also got the feeling of something being wrong with this guy. So that is why in the stream I went with Sauron or Ar-Pharazôn, but there is one detail that would have changed my mind. On the sleeves we can see Cirth's runes. They read E-L-B and most likely another E, so it could stand for Elbereth, which is the high angel of the stars and revered by the elves. The first thing the elves saw when they awoke were the stars, because they were lying on their backs. As a result, stars are very important in elven culture. Ar-Pharazôn would not in a million years wear something with Elbereth written on his sleeves. Sauron wouldn't do that either, I think, but maybe in the disguise as an ambassador of the West he would. However, there is one detail that makes this very unlikely too. It's written in Cirth and not in Tengwar. Cirth is in its origin an elven writing system invented by Daeron, as mentioned. It was invented in Middle-earth by the Sindar elves. In Aman, they would have used Fëanorian's writing system Tengwar, I think. So, in my opinion, it can't be Sauron posing as an ambassador of the West continent Aman. Númenor could have known both systems, but as said, this should be an elf. The information we later got state that this is Gil-galad, High King of the Noldor. The character was not shown in the original Vanity Fair article, but we see the person on the poster in the trailer, and in some follow-up articles he is named Gil-galad. There it seems he's not completely clad in golden robes either, and is an elf with black hair. Gil-galad would have had silver hair though, but this we only know from the Nature of Middle-earth book, which came out September 2021, so they have no rights for that and could maybe not have known before filming. And Noldor elves often have dark hair with some exceptions. As a result, I'm also very confident it's Gil-galad. On one of the screenshots from the article, we see Elrond and Galadriel meet each other, and the description says in Lindon. If these golden colors and birch trees are used for Lindon, then this picture might also show Lindon. This person here could be Gil-galad, and maybe it's some sort of ceremony. The scene where we see him appears after we see the meteor, and he looks concerned. We know he was wise and also made some decisions to counter events that would happen centuries later, though his advisors Elrond and Círdan were known for the gift of foresight too. Interestingly, I think we have not seen Círdan yet. If we return to the poster, having Elbereth written on your sleeves would make sense for a Noldor king, but it seems unusual to see it written in Cirth. For a Sindar, this would make far more sense, but of course also the Noldor of Middle-earth knew Cirth. Still, as explained, I don't like the golden robes for an elvish character, especially for Gil-galad. His name means starlight, and in the song about him a silver shield is mentioned and in general gives a very silver impression. A bit of gold is perfectly fine, but this seems to be not fitting in my opinion, though I think the poster looks pretty cool. I also can't make much sense out of the rings yet. Somebody in my chat noted that 3 fingers, not counting the thumbs, are missing a ring, which again could be an interesting symbolism for Sauron, but we already discussed why that is not the case. The image is maybe a little trap for us lore nerds. The 2 stars also give me an Elvish impression. If it's Gil-galad, they can't be Fëanorian stars though. He is distantly related to Fëanor, but he is not from his direct line, and let's say Fëanor's line and the lines of his half-brothers, that is where Gil-galad is from in all versions I know, never got along too well. The parentage of Gil-galad is a complicated topic, and in Tolkien's later writings he is the grandson of Galadriel's brother Angrod. In the Silmarillion he is the grandson of Fëanor's half-brother Fingolfin, so the grandson of Fingon, but Christopher Tolkien was unhappy that he included this in the Silmarillion. I think he called it an editorial mistake, which is why I go with the grandson of Angrod version. We often see the stars with 8 rays as insignias on all kinds of elves, for example on Galadriel's shoulders in the trailer, and she was not a fan of Fëanor, so I assume it's used in the show as, let's say, stars of the house of Finwë, who was, as mentioned, the first king of the Noldor and most likely more popular than his first son Fëanor. It could also represent the house of Finarfin, Galadriel's father. Gil-galad also belongs to it. Not sure if there are other references. I only know the mentioned ring of Barahir is originally a ring of the house of Finarfin, and it has no stars on it. Next picture, we see a person with a long red beard holding, I assume, a hammer or an axe. It almost looks like some kind of anvil. On it we again see Cirth. And interestingly, Cirth is later also sometimes called dwarf runes, because the dwarves adapted this writing system from the Sindar elves. The first king of the Sindar, Thingol, had a friendly relationship with the dwarves, and they cooperated. Through this, the dwarves learned about this elven writing system and saw that the forms of the runes could be easily carved into stone and metal, which was different for example, Tengwar, as mentioned. For the dwarves, this was very useful, and they adapted the system with some slight changes, and they became associated with the dwarves over time. As a result, this image makes perfectly sense to introduce a dwarf, which I guess surprises no one and was everyone's guess. And the first dwarf coming to mind would be Durin. The writing on the axe says, "Awake, sleeping stone." This is, in my opinion, a reference of the dwarven origin story, though Amazon has no rights for it. Durin the First, also called Durin the Deathless, was one of the 7 fathers of the dwarves. These 7 fathers and their companions were originally in Tolkien's mythology created by the Vala Aule, the High Angel of Smithing. They were very strong and unyielding, like stone, but he could not create sentient life, and they were more like puppets moving according to the will of Aule. However, Eru, that is God, spoke and explained that he envisioned elves to be the firstborn. Saddened, Aule offered his creation and wanted to destroy it again with his hammer, but Eru accepted his offer in a different way and adopted the dwarves into his creation, and they became sentient through the power of Eru. Seeing the hammer of Aule, the dwarves begged for mercy, and Eru explained what he did, and Aule did not destroy them. There was one condition though: the dwarves must sleep until the firstborn, the elves, awoke. Each father of the dwarves and their companions would be placed in different places, but Durin was alone, while the others had those companions. And out of the 7 fathers, the 7 houses of the dwarves were established. Durin had to find companions among the other houses, I assume, and founded Khazad Dûm, that is Moria. His house were the Longbeards, also known as Durin's folk. So the line "awake, sleeping stone" makes sense in this context. Of course, dwarves were not stone, but have a cultural connection to stone and are often compared to it. I like the reference. Dwarves were not immortal and lived for a relatively long time, but Durin and the Silmarillion indicates the other fathers of the dwarves too would live again, so basically reincarnate from time to time. We only know this happening for Durin, and we know there are 5, or then with the 4th age 6 more incarnations of Durin, and we can read in Appendix A of The Lord of the Rings, and 5 times an heir was born in his house so like to his forefather that he received the name Durin. In the Vanity Fair article we learn that the character here is Durin the Fourth, but at the time of Eregion and the forging of the Rings of Power lived Durin the Third. When Durin the Fourth lived, we don't know. Durin the Sixth was born 3rd age 7031, the only date we have for another incarnation, but 2nd age is possible for Durin the Fourth. In the article he is also called Prince, so he was probably in his younger years yet, while his father still ruled. We come to his father in a moment. A tiny detail that surprised me: Durin seems to have red hair, and one of the houses of the dwarves is called Firebeards. If the Durins are so similar to their forefathers, it would be strange that the first Durin had red hair, when another house is called Firebeards. I assume they had red hair due to the name. So I would not have imagined Durin having red hair, but it's also never described in the books. Just a minor remark of my side why I imagined the hair color differently. In the trailer he also appears briefly. According to some sources he has a rock smashing contest with Elrond, which is strange and maybe references the drinking contest from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films, which is also not in the book, and Elrond and Prince Durin the Fourth become good friends. Who knows? We come back later to this detail. Further, we see something like dwarven statues or masks in the background of this shot. Maybe a grave chamber? In the interview with the showrunners, we can read though that the father of Durin the Fourth will be Durin the Third, which makes no sense at all in my opinion. Tolkien states that the reincarnations of Durin take a relatively long time to happen, and it's difficult to reincarnate when your last incarnation is still alive. A detail I dislike a bit so far. Just name the father differently. Why does he has to be Durin too, or name Durin the Fourth differently if you plan covering the forging of the rings? We can also see some rings on the fingers of him, but none of them seems to be a ring of power, because all great rings of power had a gem, so I can't tell you anything about those rings seen here. I guess his father wears the ring of power that he will inherit at some point. We also see him having gold dust on his fingers, which is a detail we see on another poster. Let's continue with that one. We see a person also with gold on their hands. In a leaked screenshot of a stage of a dwarven location from the show, we also saw triangles. So in chat, my moderator Kierdan suggested this person could be a dwarf too, and he was spot on. In the Vanity Fair article, this is the dwarven princess Disa, maybe the wife of Durin. We also see her for a short moment, I assume singing in the trailer. According to Fellowship of Fans, a lament for the killed dwarves in a collapsing mineshaft. Disa is an old Swedish name with Old Norse roots. All dwarves I can think of in Tolkien's world use Old Norse names, while they don't tell their real dwarvish names to outsiders. Tolkien, for The Hobbit, started this by borrowing these names from a list of dwarven names in the Poetic Edda, written in Old Norse. Also, the name Gandalf is from there. Even the addition Oakenshield in Old Norse Ekin Skjaldi we find in it. There is also the sister of Thorin Oakenshield, Dis, mother of Vili and Kili. She is the only female dwarf known by name, and it's quite similar to Disa. Disa could mean something like goddess in Old Norse. Dis maybe means the same, or it maybe means sister. Hard to say, and I'm no Old Norse expert. The name is quite similar to Dis though, and it works perfectly as dwarven name in my opinion. She's played by British actress Sophia Nomviti. I know there is a debate about her skin color and black dwarfs, but she is just an actress playing a female dwarf. It could be that skin color is not even a topic in the series, meaning colorblind casting. And in addition, we know very little about dwarf culture in Tolkien's world, or how dwarves of different houses look. Besides Durin, we don't even know the names of the other fathers of the dwarves. So this liberty they might take here is, in my opinion, not really a problem, though I see that many might find it immersion breaking or too unusual with Peter Jackson's films in mind. Of course, there's still contradiction to the books. If they would have went with Tolkien's descriptions, we can read that people who were not dwarves could not tell male and female dwarves apart by looks or even voice. Gimli explains this in The Lord of the Rings. In one text from War of the Jewels, Tolkien even explicitly states that dwarves had beards from the beginning of their lives, male and female alike, while in Lord of the Rings it's just implied. In Nature of Middle-earth, it's mentioned that all male dwarfs have beards, but no explicit statement about females is made, which some interpret as not all female dwarfs having beards. However, the footnote also exists in context to a question about which male characters of men have beards. And except for these, no named female dwarven characters exist, and she is only mentioned to be the mother of Fili and Kili and not part of any stories. In addition, some statements of this text would contradict other texts, even from The Lord of the Rings itself, which would be the most canon text in my opinion. I assume the Nature of Middle-earth text is just a general compass for a rough who has beards guideline that does not talk about females at all. And of course, if people want to interpret it as not all dwarven women having beards, that is fine too, but it does not, in my opinion, state that Tolkien changed his mind. At most, that there might be exceptions. The text also states that none of the Eldar had any beards, but we of course know about Círdan and Mahtan as exceptions, so I think the text is really just a rough guideline. I personally like the beard detail because I think it's a nice and funny addition for the dwarves that adds to the mythology of the very different peoples in Tolkien's world. In addition, Amazon has no rights for the Nature of Middle-earth anyway, and it was shot before the book released. Interestingly, on the screenshot of the Vanity Fair article, we also see a slight beard for Disa. They maybe went with the approach we see in one small scene from the first Hobbit film, where we also see, I assume, a dwarven woman. In the trailer I could not see it though, her hand is in the way. On this picture with Disa from the Vanity Fair article, we also see Cirth in the background. The text is written in Khuzdur, the language of the dwarves, I suppose Neo-Khuzdur, a fan expansion of the language based on Tolkien's few records. I could only make sense out of a few words, for example Mazarb, which means record. We remember the Chamber of Mazarbul, the Chamber of Records. Also, we can read Khazad-dûmu at the bottom left, which means of Khazad-dûm. Sadly, my Khuzdur knowledge is not that great. I show you what I read there in Latin letters on screen in case you can find out something more. It seems the text in the middle is the same on both sides, and Mahal is the dwarvish name for Aule. Maybe a good time for a short ad break. It might be possible that you see nothing. Maybe use the time to subscribe or like the video. Much appreciated. Next picture, we see a person holding a scroll with some very unusual symbols on it. I could not find out what those are. Maybe it references some early writing system of Tolkien, or it's made up or has a real world inspiration, I don't know. It looks like it's from far away and quite alien to what we usually see in Middle-earth. The skin tone of the person in combination with the unusual script could indicate someone from the distant south, so Harad or further south. We see something like a necklace or a chain around the neck with a ring, almost reminiscent of Frodo's. The ring also does not seem to fit the fingers in size. Some have speculated a hobbit. We know from the Vanity Fair article that there will be ancestors of the hobbits, the Harfoots, in the show. The Harfoots are one of the old 3 hobbit breeds or tribes we know of. If this person might be a hobbit though is hard to say. It was not revealed in the article nor in the trailer, I think. We only know that 2 Harfoots are played by Megan Richards and Michaela Kavanagh. From the interview we know that the name of the character played by Michaela Kavanagh is Nori Brandyfoot. Speaking of those, we have these 2 posters which are, I assume, 2 female hobbits, so one would be Megan Richards and the other Michaela Kavanagh as Nori Brandyfoot, which we see in the trailer, and she has archons in her hair. I think she also narrates the trailer. On the press side of Amazon, we can see that Nori is a short form of Elanor. Sam names his daughter Elanor too. It's a flower and means sunstar in Sindarin. Really strange that she has an Elvish name when the Hobbits have no contact to them in the Second Age. The size of the archons and blackberries in their hands on the posters might be a good indicator that they are Hobbits. We can read in the article that the Hobbits tried to avoid detection. Of course, this early in time, the Hobbits did not live in the Shire yet, but east of the Misty Mountains, I assume. At some point, they must have had contact with a group of Norsemen that were the ancestors of the people of Rohan, the Éothéod, which means horse people. Records of those are also from the early Third Age, but of course they must have been around in the Second Age too. Same as Hobbits, which, according to the prologue of The Lord of the Rings, were around since the Elder Days, so the First Age. Another detail is that the woman with archons also has something like a spoon with her. Clueless Fangirl came up with a theory that she might be an ancestor of Lobelia Sackville Baggins, who probably had an obsession with spoons. Would be a pretty funny reference. The connection of Hobbits and Éothéod can be seen in the people of Rohan having legends about the Hobbits, as mentioned in Lord of the Rings by Theoden. In addition, the language the Hobbit names are based on in, for example, the Third Age, is very similar to the language of these Norsemen. This language is represented by Old English in the books. See my video about Tolkien's languages. This clearly indicates a strong influence of those people on the Hobbits, because the original Hobbit language vanished completely, it seems. Maybe the person from this poster, who is, I assume, Halbrand, is connected to the Hobbit story too. Further, we also find a note in the article that the Hobbits find a mysterious man, I assume this one here, and in the trailer we see a small hand holding his hand. Some assume it's what is called Meteor Man or Meteorite Man, because a meteor that reaches the surface of a planet becomes a meteorite. That is a mysterious man that came on the world in a meteor and came out of the meteorite. But the concept makes no sense in my opinion. Only very powerful entities would come into the world from outside. We know though of an elf called Eol finding a meteorite who makes armor and legendary swords out of its metal, so meteorites exist in Tolkien's world, but beyond that, the idea of Meteorite Man seems very off. In the trailer, we see the meteorite and a man coming out of it with fire around, pretty much confirming Meteor Man. He grabs the hand of another person who by size and proportions could be a hobbit. The rocks and fire also seem to rotate around him, which looks supernatural. In my opinion, only very powerful spirit beings can do this, like the mentioned angel-like spirit beings, the Ainur. None of them comes into the world from outside during the Second Age though. Maybe it's Sauron pretending to be the character in disguise that will become Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, pretending to be an ambassador of the West Continent. In my opinion, he did not arrive by ship in Mithlond in the books, so maybe he pretended that he came from the mainland in a meteor, which was most likely different for the Istari, the wizards and true ambassadors of the West. And in Nature of Middle-earth, it is indicated that Sauron stayed in this disguise as Anatar for a long time. But keep in mind, Meteor Man is not mentioned in the books. Other people speculated that this is indeed one of the Istari, like Gandalf or one of the two blue wizards, but that arrival does not work well with this quote. For they must be mighty, peers of Sauron, but must forgo might and clothe themselves in flesh, so as to treat on equality and win the trust of elves and men. They also don't have rights to the material with the blue wizards, it seems, as they have only access to The Lord of the Rings, its appendices and The Hobbit. Also, there is only one version where the blue wizards would appear in the Second Age, and Gandalf and the others reach Middle-earth around Third Age 1000, so much later. Of course, Amazon could take huge liberties here. In theory, it could also be a Balrog of Morgoth. Those are Maiar, let's say angels of low rank as well, like Sauron or Gandalf, associated with fire and shadow. In the mentioned interview with the showrunners, published on VanityFair.com, they answered to the question if it's Gandalf, Saruman or Radagast. Well, I would say those are not the only beings, those names in that class. With class, I guess they mean Maiar, and it's hard to tell what they hint at. Is it really a blue wizard? Another character powerful enough would be Tom Bombadil, but that also makes no sense. As said, this Meteor Man could be the person holding the red apple on the poster, and the mentioned interview pretty much confirms this. We can see the person has a beard, so I assume it's a man. He looks a bit scary or dark, and we discussed if the apple might be a reference to the fall of men, which is for example explained in the Tale of Adanel, published in Morgoth's Ring, part of the dialogue of the wise woman of men Andres and Galadriel's brother Finrod. It's a very philosophical text exploring the fates, for example the afterlife, of elves and men and their perception of those. There is no apple mentioned in this, but maybe it's a symbolic reference to Adam and Eve from the Bible, though the Bible also does not describe the fruit as apple either, but as a fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In medieval art it was often depicted as apple, and so it was mostly remembered by people throughout time as such. So combining the information we have, the person on the poster is most likely the mentioned Meteorite Man in the trailer. The article says that hobbits find a mysterious man, and the interview says this too in the section about Meteor Man. As said, only extremely powerful entities would be able to do that and also come from outside the world, which is nothing that happened in the Second Age. In this age, these entities like the Valar, the High Angels and Maiar, the Angels of low rank like Sauron, the Balrogs, Gandalf and the other Istari already lived in the world. Using the symbol of the apple might hint at a figure comparable to the devil, which would be Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. In the Bible and some interpretations of certain passages, we also find the idea of the devil falling into the world, maybe like a meteorite. I hope they are not doing something like this. Morgoth is bent into the void. Of course, Tolkien often mentioned a world-ending final battle like the Ragnarök in Norse mythology or the Apocalypse, where the first Dark Lord returns, but that was for sure not in the Second Age, and Tolkien abandoned a certain core aspect of this idea again. Complicated topic. However, Tolkien was always very reluctant interpreting his text in a religious way, and not a huge fan of at least some forms of allegory or seeing his writings as such. Though Hebraic and Christian elements are definitely part of Tolkien's works too, but often used more subtle. I hope I'm completely wrong here, but hearing about Meteor Man also made me worry that they would add weird things to Tolkien's world that might feel completely out of place. Next we have this poster with a man holding a rope and a mysterious ring that looks like a ring from Dark Souls 3. Some rumors went into the direction of this being Isildur, and in the interview it is mentioned that he is a sailor. In the stream we thought maybe somebody that has to do with ships as well due to the rope. However, when I saw an image of the character Halbrand in the Vanity Fair article, I thought it might be him because both wear something green, but the shirts are different and we see some unusual script on Halbrand's shirt, which is missing on the other picture. I sadly could not read it. Some speculated it being Númenorian script. However, Halbrand seems to be an Old English name, so he could be a Northman from the Éothéod or a Hobbit, but he does not look like a Hobbit. Of course, he could be from Númenor, living in Middle-earth, changing his name. Some say he is Aragorn 2.0. We also have this poster here, which instantly gives me the impression of a lord from Rohan, but Rohan does not exist yet and will be founded several thousand years later. But it could be one of the mentioned ancestors of Rohan, so one of the Éothéod, or even the ancestors of those. As said, it means horse people, so the horse had even in the early Third Age a strong cultural connection, and one can assume it was also like that before the Third Age. So I assume this person here on the poster is Halbrand. We see this unusual sword that might reference Herogrim, the sword of Theoden from Lord of the Rings, in the background of the screenshot from the Vanity Fair article, stating the person sitting there is Halbrand, so it must be him. Halbrand could mean something like intact sword. As said, he gives some Aragorn vibes, who has the broken sword. In the article it is said that he is a fugitive from his own past, whatever that means. On another screenshot we see him on a raft with Galadriel, and in the trailer we also see this raft scene, but in addition also a scene with a hand moving Galadriel's head to the side to reveal her pointy ear. I assume that is Halbrand. The background also looks like they are on the ocean, and there was the rumor of Galadriel sailing to Númenor with somebody who stumbled into this journey with her. Galadriel sailing to Númenor at the time of the last king of Númenor would contradict the books in my opinion. I made a video about this topic explaining it with sources in case you are interested. Looking at the raft scene, we maybe see here two persons on the raft, but I could be wrong. I also like this chest on the raft. What could be in it? Though in this scene the raft looks really damaged already. I could imagine the reason why we have this ear reveal scene might be because in some versions Galadriel is banned from sailing to Aman. In some First Age stories of the Silmarillion, all Noldor are still banned from returning to Aman, and when they get close, storms rage to prevent the elven ships from reaching Aman, often destroying the ships and even drowning the elven mariners. Of course, she is not sailing to Aman, but she gets close. Maybe Galadriel is the cause of the storm, and seeing the ears revealing her as elf or maybe even as Galadriel makes him aware of why the journey was not so smooth. I assume they did not start on that raft and their ship got destroyed in a storm, and Galadriel might have been the reason. Speaking of Galadriel, this poster shows her, and that was also the prediction of Clueless Fangirl, my guest, and me in the stream. The Vanity Fair article shows her in armor and it fits perfectly to the poster, so it's 100% her. On the poster, she holds a dagger which is half silver and half gold. It clearly references the mentioned two trees of Valinor. Laurelin was the golden tree and Telperion the silver tree, and the upper part of the dagger looks a bit like a tree. In addition, we see 3 pearls on the blade, which could stand for the 3 Silmarilli, some suggested the 3 kinslayings. In the first kinslaying, the Teleri were killed by the Noldor of Feanor in the city of the Teleri elves Alqualonde, which is described as decorated with pearls. Galadriel's mother Eärwen was a Teler elf and the daughter of the king of the Teleri in Aman. The Teleri also loved the 2 trees of Valinor like all elves, and they also loved the water. So it could be a dagger of the Teleri, but I guess it could also be a Noldor one. Curious if we learn more about it and its lore. We also see Galadriel in her armor climbing an icy mountain using this dagger as some kind of ice axe. Looked a bit like the Tomb Raider or Uncharted video games. The dagger is not moving the slightest while she is hanging on it, which makes it look a bit uncanny. Below Galadriel we also see 3 other persons. We speculated this being Helcaraxë, the icy wasteland that connected the west continent Aman with Middle-earth. After sailing from Aman to Middle-earth, Crazy Feanor burned the ships he stole after the first kinslaying, so that the other Noldor elves waiting for the ships to return had to walk. Going back to Middle-earth to attack Morgoth was also against the will of the High Angels, so they got banned from Aman. The waiting Noldor now were too proud to beg for forgiveness, and seeing the ships burn on the other side, oceans weren't banned yet, they had to walk over Helcaraxë to Middle-earth. In some versions Galadriel must have also traveled this way, so this being a flashback to the Noldor crossing Helcaraxë led by Fingolfin was our first thought. If you want to learn more about this story, check my video about Elrond and his ancestors or the history of the elves one. This was really just the short version. There are 2 details that do not fit though. First, we see the sun. Crossing Helcaraxë was still during the years of the trees and not the years of the sun, so sun and moon did not exist yet, and it should have been always night there. Though when the elves finally reached Middle-earth, the sun first rose. Second, we see mountains made of stone. Helcaraxë had no landmass as foundation. It was, in my opinion, just a frozen bridge wasteland over the ocean. So this can't be Helcaraxë. I found another Vanity Fair article claiming this could be an expedition of Galadriel to the northern waste, sometimes called Forod, which can also mean the inhabitants of it. This is a very cold region in the far north of Middle-earth, where, for example, some dragons hide. Galadriel being there in the Second Age makes very little sense to me. In the article we can read that she is hunting down the last remnants of their, Morgoth and Sauron's, collaborators who claimed the life of her brother, so I guess she searches them there. In theory, the ruins of Morgoth's first fortress, Utumno or Udun, could be there very far in the north, but it's hard to believe she would go there. His second fortress, Angband, was sunk into the ocean. Also, if this placed just a few hundred years into the Second Age, most men that were on Morgoth's side would be dead already. Who is she hunting then? Orcs? Corrupted elves? Galadriel had 3 brothers, and 2 died in the wars of the First Age, and 1 was killed by Sauron's werewolves. It's speculated that this person here seen in the trailer is Finrod, her oldest brother, though I think his ears do not look that pointy, but it's hard to see. The whole battle scene gives me First Age vibes though. We might see a Balrog here in the background, and also orcs for the first time. The insignia on the armor is again the 8-rayed star, so Elvish, and we see a tree on this shield. Sure, that could work for Númenor as well. If there are men fighting in Elvish armor, it's definitely the First Age. The Balrog, if it's one, is also a good indicator for that. If this is Finrod, then this could be the Dagor Bragolach, the Battle of Sudden Flame. Could also be one of the earlier battles, though he was already dead when the next big battle happened. The Battle of Unnumbered Tears, the Nirnais Arnödiad. So it can't be that one. Shoutouts to the viewer Killswitch. I would further assume if this is Finrod, he might be the brother of Galadriel mentioned in the article, but he was captured by Sauron and died fighting a werewolf with his bare hands and teeth, protecting his friend Beren and fulfilling his oath to Beren's father Barahir. In the end, Finrod slew the werewolf but died from his wounds too. Very hard to say who collaborators besides Sauron would be in this story, but maybe they changed the story a bit. According to the Vanity Fair interview, Amazon does not have the rights for the Silmarillion where this story is told. It is very briefly mentioned in The Lord of the Rings too though. Galadriel's 2 other brothers are not mentioned in The Lord of the Rings at all. When it comes to Galadriel wearing an armor, that seems unusual for her, but in one version Tolkien wrote she defended Alqualonde heroically during the first kinslaying against the Fëanorians and actively participated in battle. Her mother's name was also Nerwen, which means man-maiden, and Tolkien describes her as wise but also athletic. And in some notes of Tolkien we find the hint that elven females are pretty equal to males when it comes to physical strength in their younger years, and elves are pretty powerful beings in general. But of course many different versions of Galadriel exist. In the version where she fights in Alqualonde, her husband Celebrimbor is also a Teler elf from Aman and not a Cinder, which contradicts what is described in Lord of the Rings and in The Road Goes Ever On. But it's possible that Amazon's show pushes towards this detail published in the Unfinished Tales even without the rights. From reading various articles and interviews, I got the impression that Galadriel will travel a lot for her mission of revenge. In the books, she also travels quite a bit, but also gave birth to her daughter Celebrian, Second Age 300, so very early in the Second Age. And she was also involved in the foundation of Eregion, 450 years later, and then in the whole Rings of Power arc. I don't see her in battle mode in this time, going on dangerous missions. She also had Celebrimbor as husband, which we have not seen at all yet. I personally see her more on the diplomatic side of things in the Second Age already, and not as an Amazon. Tolkien wrote in letter 348, "It is a secondary name given to her in her youth in the far past, because she had long hair which glistened like gold but was also shot with silver. She was then of Amazon disposition and bound up her hair as a crown when taking part in athletic feats." I think youth in the far past clearly references the first age of the years of the trees, not the second age, but of course one can interpret that differently. And even in the first age, Galadriel did not really fight. We only know her fighting in Alqualonde in one text where Tolkien started to increase her power and significance. In the section called Laws and Customs from Morgoth's Ring, we can read that elven women rarely took up arms, though Galadriel also later attacked Dol Guldur with Celebrimbor. Still, she only fought in extreme situations, in my opinion, and it was also her dream of having her own realm and not be under the tutelage of Aman anymore, as Tolkien described it in the Unfinished Tales. That is also why founding Eregion makes so much sense for her. We can read in the interview that Elrond is sent to Eregion, which makes sense, but I fear that Galadriel might be missing from that story because she is busy somewhere else. Under one screenshot we can read Galadriel, commander of the Northern armies, and in the trailer we see her riding, leading some other characters. If we look at the mountain range in the background, these could be the Misty Mountains. We at least see mist. If so, this location would be what will later be the Gap of Rohan. Maybe called the Gap of Calenardon at some point in the Second Age, according to the Unfinished Tales. Seeing the riders and considering the quote, maybe these are Northmen and the Northern armies. She seems to meet Halbrand at some point, and I would argue he is a Northman. But the other riders could be elves too, though the closest don't look that elvish to me. She's also seen with Elrond on this screenshot and wears something like a golden crown, which might be a nice book reference to Galadriel's song, quote, "And in a fading crown have twined the golden Elanor." Elanor is, as mentioned, a flower that appears in Lord of the Rings, meaning Sunstar in Sindarin. We talked about Sam's daughter having this name and also a Hobbit character from the show, Elanor Nori Brandyfoot. On the screenshot we also see her in water or the sea and a ship in the background. Maybe this is her arriving in Númenor, if the rumor is true, after the raft section. Hard to tell, but she appears in a lot of places and I think she will be a very different Galadriel from what we know from The Lord of the Rings. Another detail I noticed from the trailer. Initially I thought this could be Elrond, but it's not, and his clothes are distantly similar to Galadriel's, so I assume it's one of the three persons climbing up the icy mountain with her. It's 100% Kip Chapman, and we don't know who he plays yet. He seems to be inside the mountain, but it looks like there are tiles on the floor, so not a natural cave. He explores this tunnel with a torch and encounters a being, which some assume to be an ice troll. It looks a bit weird. Some suggested it's a nameless thing, but I would exclude that because not even Sauron knew about them. We also see ice and snow there, so it would fit the northern waste. But who built this place? Is it really a leftover of Morgoth's first fortress Udun? It's mentioned once in Lord of the Rings by Gandalf on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, but who in their right mind would go there? Angband is also mentioned in Lord of the Rings, though it's below the ocean at this time, as mentioned, but the question stays the same. Who would go there? I could imagine that Kip Chapman's character is an elf too. Maybe it's Celebrimbor. The bow he carries looks a bit elvish. Next poster would be this one. We see a very unusual armor with a face on it, made out of wood, and the person is holding an arrow. My initial thought was an ancient Easterling because the armor looks so unusual and outlandish. Also, the face carved in it has a beard, and beards are very unusual for elves, so I did not expect an elf. It's maybe depicting an Ent or maybe even Tom Bombadil. My initial guess was wrong though. According to the Vanity Fair article, this is Ismael Cruz Cordova playing the Silvan Elf Arondir. We also see him in the trailer catching an arrow in slow motion, protecting somebody lying on the ground and shooting the arrow back. A scene like this we would see with Legolas if it was a Peter Jackson film. I could not really find out what the name means. Maybe something like nobleman in Sindarin? Hard to say. There was a lot of discussion about skin color online, which I'm not interested in, but of course elves in the books are never described as having a dark skin type. I don't mind having a Puerto Rican actor portray an elf though. I guess it's just colorblind casting and I think he could be a very good actor. Further, we learn that he is in love with a woman of men called Bronwyn. Wyn means joy in Old English and developed to win over time, and Bron could be an alternative form of Brand again, which would mean sword, fire or torch. If we look at her blue clothes, they seem reminiscent of this poster, and indeed, we also see this golden belt on both pictures. In the stream, I speculated she might be a Númenorian because we see a seagull and a jellyfish on the golden belt, and the Númenorians were great mariners. It's not clear where she is from, but the Old English name indicates her also being of the Northmen. She is described in the article as healer and having an apothecary. On the second screenshot, we see her sitting inside it. On this poster, we see her having a sickle, which now makes sense in this context. We speculated that she might be a druid, and maybe she has Númenorian roots, because those also had some knowledge about herbs and brought later Athelas, Kingsfall, back to Middle-earth from Númenor. The jacket she wears on the poster also gives the impression of her hiding, though the sickle also looks like a weapon. A romantic relationship of elf and man is very rare in the books and usually related to powerful bloodlines of the half-elven like Elrond. There are some other examples of a union of elf and man though. For example, the princes of Dol Amros from The Lord of the Rings have elven blood, but the term half-elven is never used for the first prince, which might have several reasons, too complex to discuss here. Also, Galadriel's brother Aegnor was in love with the wise woman of men Andres in the First Age. They never married though, because Aegnor died in the Battle of Sudden Flame, the Dagor Bragolach, so these relationships exist outside the epic stories of the Silmarillion, but still, they are very rare. Not sure if I like this, because it's not really a topic of the Second Age. Feels a bit forced to me. Speaking of half-elven and Elrond, in the article we see a screenshot of Elrond and his clothes fit best to this poster, where we also see the scepter, staff or sword. Not sure what it truly is. My moderator Kierdan suggested that the sculpture of a building on top might depict Gondolin, the great elven city of the Noldor from the First Age, where Elrond's ancestors, by his father's side, are from. His father Eärendil was, for example, born in Gondolin. So my moderator was probably right. I thought of this to be the scepter of Anúminas, though that one is silver and this does not really look silver, but it could be just the light. However, this scepter would be in Númenor with the lords of Andúnir in the Second Age, not with Elrond. In the article, Elrond is described as politician, which is not unfitting considering him being the herald of Gil-galad, High King of the Noldor elves. A herald is something like a diplomat of a lord or a king. On one screenshot we also see him and Galadriel. It looks like they have not seen each other in a while. He is distantly related to Galadriel. He also has a twin brother called Elros, as mentioned, the first king of Númenor. In the trailer we see him too. He looks at a stone and holds something that looks dwarven. In the background we see people too who seem to celebrate holding mugs. They have beards and the location could be below the earth, so most likely dwarves. The Vanity Fair article sheds some light on this. The scene shows a rock-splitting contest between Prince Durin IV and Elrond, who traveled there to re-establish the friendship between Lindon and the dwarves of Moria, which makes sense because Moria will later help Elrond in the War of Elves and Sauron. So I like the idea of him on a diplomatic mission here, putting things into motion. I think there is no reference for a contest like that in the books, but why not? In this contest, Elrond is maybe inspecting the stone, and next to him is the handle of the dwarven pickaxe in this scene. We also see Durin the Fourth split a rock in the trailer, and if you look at it frame by frame, you notice that Durin's rock split into two, while this rock here is split into 3 or more parts, and also the face changes, so I assume this is Elrond's try. The dwarves in the background look great in my opinion, so I look forward to see Khazad Dûm being an inhabited dwarven capital full of light and music. Next we have this noble woman holding a white flower. Númenor had a white tree, once gifted to them by the elves. See my video about the white tree of Gondor, because the white tree of Gondor is a direct relative of this tree. It was called Nimloth, which translates to white flower. I also see like an Egyptian style in what she wears. In letter 211, Tolkien describes that Egypt was an inspiration for Gondor, which is founded by the faithful Númenorians surviving the downfall of Númenor, and as a result this could be in parts implied for Númenor too. So I assume she is the last Númenorian queen, Tar-Míriel, which was rumored to be in the series. It would fit quite well, and the flower could be a flower of Nimloth, though the tree is described having fruits, but it's also an image of Telperion, one of the 2 trees of Valinor, which also had flowers. The moon was created out of the last flower of Telperion. Speaking of Tar-Míriel, according to some unofficial leaks, the person on this poster is supposed to be Ar-Pharazôn, probably not king yet, just Pharazôn, but not sure what his name was before he became king. He would be the last king of Númenor, driven by the fear of death, which was a huge topic on Númenor. He was also called Ar-Pharazôn the Golden, as mentioned, and forces his cousin Tar-Míriel to marry him, usurping the throne in the process. The clothes have gold woven into it, which hints at an advanced society, either Númenorian or Elvish. We also see rings with gems. In the stream I guessed Gil-galad, but we now know the person in gold is Gil-galad, and so the leak seems to be correct because we have not many nobles on the posters left that could be Pharazôn. Staying in Númenor, we have this woman in a red dress holding a book. This is rumored to be the sister of Isildur, and her name is, according to rumors, Carine, but she was not mentioned in the Vanity Fair article, nor is she seen in the trailer. In the books, Isildur only has a brother, Anarion, and no sister is mentioned. It can happen that not all children are mentioned, especially daughters, but for Númenor it would be unusual because they were good at recording things, and at this time females could become ruling queen, and the lords of Andúnie were also directly related to the first king of Númenor. That means from a royal line as well, just that it's the line of Silmarillion, who was the first child of a king of Númenor early in history, but at this time women had no claim to the throne yet, which changed later, and so her younger brother Mineldur became king. The faithful line of the lords of Andúnie are Silmarillion's descendants. Still, in this line women are mentioned, so I would argue this invented character is not fully plausible. I hope they don't ignore the existence of Anarion again as in the Peter Jackson films. I could not find a good translation for Carine. Carina would mean done, finished, or maybe completed in Quenya, and the name must be Quenya. Her brothers also have Quenya names. If the ending ine would be a diminutive, it could be the one of deed, whatever that is in English. Let me know in the comments. Would be a strange name though. Some might think it could contain the word red, so fitting the color of her dress, but that would be carne or carni in Quenya. Next picture would be a person in a dark armor holding a black sword. I have to admit the design of the sword is a bit too fantasy-like for my taste. I prefer how Peter Jackson went with a more grounded style, but that is a subjective matter. On the gauntlet we maybe also see some gold, but I don't think it's a dwarf again. Some suggest that this is Sauron, but the second Dark Lord is in the books more like a dark sorcerer, a necromancer, a deceptive shapeshifter and commander. This this character looks more like a warrior at the front line. I guess Peter Jackson established the idea of Sauron wearing an armor and a mace like his former master Morgoth did at some point, but it's not described in the books. My initial thought was a prototype of a black Númenorian, or even one of the Nazgûl in an early state, maybe even the Witch King. However, rumors suggest that this is a character called Adar, a corrupted elf, but the character is not mentioned in the article or trailer. The corrupted elf concept is problematic in Tolkien's world, in my opinion. One could hint at the origin story of the orcs, but this also changed a lot in Tolkien's writings over time. He was never happy of using elves for the origin of orcs and later switched to corrupting and twisting men instead. But of course, he now had problems with the timeline because men awoke long after orcs were first mentioned. He never solved this problem, sadly. Also, in the history, we only know of very few elves that worked for a Dark Lord, but I guess it happened, so it's possible. The pommel of the sword maybe looks like a dark, corrupted version of the pommel of Galadriel's dagger, but I guess I interpret too much into it. But should they want to express a connection here, and this person is Galadriel's opponent, you heard it here first. The article mentions that she is hunting down the last collaborators of Morgoth and Sauron, who killed her brother. She has 3 brothers. 2 were killed in the War of Sudden Flame, and 1, which was Finrod, was killed by Sauron during imprisonment, or by his werewolf to be precise, as mentioned. Not sure what is meant by collaborators in this context though, but Adar could be the adversary she is looking for. In addition, if this is later in the Second Age, only an elf or an Ainu, a spirit being, would be still alive anyway. I hope they don't add another brother to the story that was not in the books, but I assume they will use her brother Finrod because he is the only brother mentioned in The Lord of the Rings and they don't have the rights for the Silmarillion. Another character with a black sword is this one, but here the sword is broken. I thought this would be the rumored character Adar, because he looks more like the corrupted elf for me, while the other looked more completed. We also see a rune on the blade, but I could not make any sense out of it. Some speculated that this or the other black sword is Gurthang, the sword of Durin, but in my opinion that is not possible. Yes, it broke too, but it was at Durin's grave in Beleriand, which was sunk into the ocean, though the area with the grave might have not been sunk and is now the island called Tol Morwen. Morwen was Durin's mother and she was buried close to her children. Morwen's grave was on that island, so the grave of her children should be on it too. In theory, one could have gotten the sword from there, but it also needs to be considered that in one writing about the end of the world, Durin comes back, gets his sword, I guess reforges it, and in at least one version of that slays Morgoth with it. The location and existence of Tol Morwen is also debated. It's on the map Amazon published though. Another theory I had afterwards, Halbrand means intact sword, and this person has a sword not intact, so maybe he is the adversary of Halbrand for whatever reason. Meteors and making black swords out of it is also a thing we find in the Silmarillion, but I'm not a fan of bringing First Age legends in this form back into the Second Age. If a mythical element like this happens more than once, it, in my opinion, loses its uniqueness. The sword hilt also looks a bit similar to the other one, so I guess it has to do with Mordor? In the trailer, we also have a scene where we see this person here in the air with an axe, while he has a long chain bound to his leg. I guess he is leaping. Interestingly, he has elven ears. I would assume that is maybe Adar. It could also be Arondir, I guess. Maybe it's the character with the broken sword. I don't know. In the bottom right of the screen, we also see 2 persons. Maybe orcs? The faces look so grayish dark. Not sure if the elf is trying to hit the wooden beam or the other 2 persons who maybe hold his chain or at least chained him. From the Silmarillion we know that Sindar elves used axes and also Noldor forged them, maybe as weapons. Next picture is this person. The dress looks not royal but also not poor. The pattern on it depicts a star with 8 rays, could be again a Fëanorian star or a symbol of the house of Finwë or Finarfin as explained. So I guess it could be an elf of the Noldor, maybe from Eregion. We also see a belt in the middle of the picture, which does not really look elvish though. I could so far not make much sense out of it, and as a result I have not much to say here beyond that. On the next picture we see maybe a farmer with some kind of staff or tool. I could not find out what this stuff is or what its purpose might be. Some speculate this is a blue wizard, but his clothes do not look blue, but in my opinion greenish. Looking at the color code in Photoshop also confirms this, and if it's a blue wizard, I guess they would have went with a color easier to identify as blue. Hard to say if we will even see the blue wizards at all, and if so, maybe just as small reference, not as full fleshed out characters playing a role in the story. They most likely don't have the rights for that. I guess this is maybe another Hobbit farmer. In a worst case scenario, it's a made up green wizard or something. If this is a blue wizard and Meteor Man too, then we would have our 2 blue wizards though. They don't have the rights for the Unfinished Tales and Peoples of Middle-earth material though, and it's only mentioned in Lord of the Rings that there are 5 wizards, so they could make something up for the remaining 2 as a result. Maybe that's what they are doing. On the last poster we see another female person with a similar clothing style, so maybe also a farmer, a hobbit, or both. I think though she might be pregnant. Every picture focuses on a certain detail in its center, and the focus here is on her belly and hands, so maybe. In the trailer and in the article we also see 2 nomadic hunters. They carry huge antlers with them, a word I just recently learned. No idea if there's a reference for this in the books, seems made up. I assume if they are hunters, they use the antlers as some kind of disguise to get close to whatever animal they are hunting. The initial landscape shot from the trailer looks so Peter Jackson-like and familiar. I loved it, but I could not recognize the landscape. Looking at the shadows, the mountain range in the background could be in the east, so this could be somewhere west of the Misty Mountains. The mountains could also be the Orokarni in the far east, so this location would be somewhere in Rhûn. Hard to say though if it's Noon or the filmmakers even thought of this. The articles mentioned a few more details and I link them in the description. One point was about time compression, which worries me a bit. It seems they place many events in the show at the same time that did not happen in parallel in the books. The argument for that is of course plausible. The Second Age is quite long and has many long gaps. As a result, it would be hard to use human characters. They would simply die in the meantime, and while elves would mostly stay in the show, characters of men would change a lot. This is of course a huge challenge. A solution I would have hoped for was them focusing on important events of the Second Age which work in the boundaries of a human life, and just cover it in a lot of detail and add interesting aspects to it, as Tolkien only wrote very loose notes and descriptions of the Second Age. And then cover a new event every season, but it seems they go for a far broader coverage of the Second Age and just compress time a lot. I'm not sure how I like that, because it generates the danger of them screwing things up. Often these gaps are there for a reason and to make some events more plausible. In addition, the show could feel extremely different from what fans of the books know, and as a result immersion breaking. In a worst case scenario it could not feel Tolkien and like bad fan fiction. I know there have to be changes, but messing with the timeline is in my opinion risky. I understand why they are doing this though. And on top of that, we know they must add new characters and change things. Still, we also saw a lot of practical effects and writings in Tolkien's scripts where people definitely put in some effort and knew what they were doing. All images have interesting small details, so there is potential, but fans have of course their own imagination, and if these are not met and elements don't work out, which will happen as always because perfection is rarely achieved in film, then frustration can occur. I personally enjoyed the trailer except for the Meteor Man thing, and we should keep in mind it's a teaser for a very wide audience. For me, not nailing the dialogues, and I hope they use the little second age dialogues we have, adding nonsensical elements that don't feel Tolkien, and changing the world so much that it does not seem like it's Tolkien's world anymore are my biggest worries. I guess they could manage to bring us back to Middle-earth, but for me it would be very immersion breaking if it felt not like Tolkien's world. I'm fully aware that there must be changes in an adaptation too, but there also must be a balance, so it does not feel like something else or fanfiction. I want to quote a small dialogue snippet from The Lord of the Rings between Saruman and Gandalf. Saruman said, "White claws can be dyed, the white page can be overwritten, and the white light can be broken. In which case it is no longer white," said Gandalf. The white pages of the Second Age can be filled and lore can be overwritten as well, in which case it would be no longer Tolkien's world. I hope they find the right balance. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this massive video. I would love to discuss lore, Tolkien's languages, interesting references. I know some people criticized the costumes a bit, which I think is fair for some of them, but in my opinion some are pretty good as well and have a lot of details. But I don't want to discuss skin color of actors or political stuff. I had enough of that in the last days for a lifetime. Instead, tell me what lore references you liked or disliked. What are some details they could easily get wrong adapting Tolkien's writings, etc. I try to explain what I liked and why, and what I disliked and why so far. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, subscribe, and as said, leave a comment. I'm a bit sorry to cover the show so much recently. I would also love to return to covering the book's lore again. I still have some interesting topics on my list, and I need to finish the Elrond and the Third Age video. Also, there will be another livestream and so on. If you don't want to hear about the show, maybe check my other book-focused lore videos or the Lord of the Rings book and films analysis and differences series, which will also continue soonish, I hope. There are tons of good lore videos on my channel, and there are playlists: Glorfindel, Elrond, Círdan, Rohan, languages, pronunciation, the unseen, I got you covered. So maybe check out those. Gaming wise, we are getting closer to the release of Elden Ring, which I will play on my Twitch channel and maybe make a review or something. Shoutouts to all the people supporting me, much appreciated. I hope I did not forget anybody in the credits. In case you heard the wind howling in the background, it was quite stormy here in Europe. Again, thank you for watching and goodbye.